Okay, so our speaker for today is actually a very busy person. So we're very lucky to have him today. He's one of the key persons leading the school in the transition to online learning in not just our school, but even other Jesuit schools. He's an alumnus of the Ateneo de Manila University. He received his undergraduate degree in management, communications technology management from the Loyola schools. And he also has a master's degree in education, major in educational administration from the same university. Right now, he is an instructor in the education department, communications department, and is the assistant director and coordinator for innovation in education technology at the Ateneo Salt Institute. So he's the right man guy or right hand of Father Johnny Go. His current work includes the design of massive open online courses for professional development and research in the area of student-centered learning in higher education. Previously, before he came to work in Ateneo, he also served as an education technology specialist for the basic ed sector transformation program in the Department of Education, ICT Service Department. And he was also the former coordinator of the computer subject area at Xavier School, San Juan. Finally, he is also an Apple Distinguished Educator and an Apple Professional Learning Consultant. So let's all welcome also a good friend of mine. We're currently co-teaching the Adaptive Design for Learning course for the junior high school. So let's give a hand or a virtual clap for Mr. Galvin RADLEY Elmo.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you.
And welcome to the high school.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the teachers. I assume that most of you are new to the Ateneo, at least for this year, no, for this school year, or at least new full time. So welcome. I just want to do some quick checks before I begin. I'll try to share my screen, and then beforehand, I just want to ask if it's okay to record our session so that maybe I can clip the talk version and then I can send it to you also if you feel like it will be useful for reference in the future. Okay lang ba? Ayan, okay, sige. I see some nodding heads. I hope that means a yes, no? At least in the Philippines, yes, ibig sabihin yan. Okay, sige. So, let me just share my screen. I just want to check if you can see my screen there. You should be able to see right now Mentimeter or a logo called Adaptive Design for Learning. Is that what you see? Can you give me some sort of signal that that's what you see? Great, sige. Okay, so let's start. So, good afternoon. I won't introduce myself anymore, but I guess my role for the day, and first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of your in-service session. So the SALT Institute and across the university, we've really been investing a lot of time and effort in learning what we mean by adaptive design for learning. No? And I know that you might be new to it, so hopefully this afternoon session will give you an orientation about what we actually mean by ADL. There's a whole course about it, so I cannot promise to go that deep. But hopefully in the next few minutes, we get to have some conversations about some of the key principles of ADL. No? Because I think that as you move forward in preparing for your online courses and facilitating your courses, your classes rather, with your students, hopefully these guiding principles will be helpful for you. So I'd like to begin. So I think that any good session doesn't begin with the speaker, but begins with the participant. So I'd like to begin with a short exercise. Don't worry, hindi kayo tatayo, hindi to PE exercise at walang Zumba. But I want us to just, I hope that you can participate in this short poll. Let me just click next there. So I don't know if you've tried to use Mentimeter before, but I hope that you can see the question on my screen. No? So before I even begin talking about ADL, about what ADL is and what the guiding principles are, I'd like to ask you first. No? So this is not a test, so please don't research ADL right now. Please don't Google. But I want you to begin to describe how you think online teaching and learning will be. Okay? And I want you to do this by giving me 3 words that depict your current notion, opinion, or perspective. So for some of you who were probably on board in the past few months, you're probably more deep into the preparation, so you have a better sense of what it might look like. For some of you who just joined, then maybe this is your current perception, no, based on your opinion, based on your own background. Sige. So what I'd like to do is to ask you to go to menti.com. I will put the link over chat. Menti.com. Sorry, wrong spelling. Menti.com. And when asked for a code, please enter the code 866462. If you're using a desktop, you might switch to a new tab to do this. Otherwise, matatanggal kayo dito sa meeting. If you're using a browser, a mobile device, then that might mean opening a browser for a while. But taking note of the code, no, since you'll need to enter the code. So again, the code is 86, medyo maliit, 6442. Okay. So go to any browser, type in menti.com, and then enter the code 866442. You will see 3 blanks. Enter 1 word per blank, and then click on submit. Okay? Sige. Did you get my instructions? Thumbs up if you got my instructions. Great. Sige. So let's spend the next few seconds doing that. So please participate in our poll question to start our session for this afternoon. Ayan na. So I just want to check if you're seeing what I'm seeing. I'm seeing the words. You can see the words. Yes? Okay, good. Sige. Code not working for you. You might just need to refresh and re-enter 866442. Yeah. All right. So for those who are seeing the words, if it's your first time to see a word cloud, basically, the bigger the word, that means more people are posting the same word, exactly the same word. Sige, so I got 5. Code not working then. Let me see what's happening. Ayan, welcome to the world of technology, diba? Again, menti.com, and then I can see it on screen. The code is 866462. Ay, sorry, mali ako. 866462. So hindi technology ang mali, ako ang mali, no? So I typed it wrongly over chat. Sorry about that. So the code is 866462. So I've corrected it over chat. Sorry. Sige, sa mga hindi nakapasok kanina, please try again. No? So I'll give you a few seconds to do this. For those who are done, tingnan nyo na muna yung screen, and then let's take a look at some of the words that are emerging. No? So far, parang merong mga lumulutang na mga words like challenging, innovative, okay, student-centered. Okay. So if you're looking at the screen, it's also interesting to read the small words. No? The small words means that most probably only one person actually submitted the word. So even if it's only one person, it might still be interesting to take a look at what they think or what they feel about this question. No? So a few people feel scary, like it's scary, an adventure, unknown, okay, exciting, student-centered, innovative, unconventional, crossroads, nice, engaging, flexible. Sige, so I got 10. How many are we in the room right now? Sige, baka nahihiya lang yung iba, no? We're 18 in the room, including me. So we'll wait for a couple more just so we can get a majority. Ayan, so I got 13. So let me just begin to process it at the moment. So far, what you can see here, this word cloud paints a picture of how people feel about what might happen in online teaching and learning, at least in the coming months. No, it's pretty soon. No, that we're nearing August. Your school opening is going to be quite soon. No, I know that some schools are starting to open. I think that Xavier School is going to open this week. So it's pretty quick. And it seems like a lot of us feel like it will be challenging. So that seems to be the #1 word here, followed by student-centered, great to know, innovative, exciting, and then some people have submitted other words like limited. Okay, what could be limiting about online learning? No, we'll talk about that in a while. Scary, unknown, practical, adventure. No? So I think it's an interesting balance of of some words that promote anxiety because it's challenging, because you're not so sure what's going to happen, unknown. But there seems to be a lot of optimism in the room too, which is great. No, that despite the fact that it might be a challenging experience for a lot of us, it might be an exciting experience as well, an innovative experience, no? An opportunity to innovate, to do something new and different that will make a difference. So allow me to stop sharing this, and I will switch to my slides now. Sige. Okay. Okay, so I just want to make sure that you're seeing what I'm seeing. So if you're seeing the instructions to the activity that we did, then we're okay. Can you give me some signal that you're seeing what I'm seeing? Great. Sige, salamat. So konting demo na rin, no? So in a synchronous session, if you haven't handled one before in a synchronous class, you'll need to do some of these things because sometimes it feels like you're talking to a wall, no? Kasi ang tahimik na lahat, nakamute lahat, di ba? And literally, boses ko lang yung naririnig ko. So there's no, if you've taught before, I'm sure you can relate to what I'm saying, na parang there's usually a feel of the room, di ba? The feel of being with your students, the feel of your students hearing you, the feel of your seeing your students actually listening to you. No? So unfortunately, in online learning, that's one of the things that sometimes we lose out on. So there are some things that you will convert to things that are more explicit. So it will be awkward in the beginning. Like, magiging makulit ako to ask things like, do you see what I'm seeing? Nagigets niyo ba? Diba? Because without any reaction, parang it really feels like you're talking to a wall. No? Sige. So the question that we asked this afternoon is actually a very similar question that was asked earlier before we started to embark on this journey of articulating what, yung anak ko yun, articulating what adaptive design for learning is. No? That adaptive design for learning is really a way for us to express our answer to the question, what will online education offered by Ateneo look like or sound like? And if you're on Facebook, if you're on social media, di ba, parang laganap ang mga webinar ngayon, no? Parang halos lahat na lang ng bagay pwede gawan ng webinar. From paano maglagay ng foundation para gwapo at maganda ka sa webcam, to all sorts of things, no? Most especially in education, you see it all around. And I think that since that was our context at the SALT Institute, what we said was, I think we need to articulate what we believe we want online learning to be. Okay, so I think it's important for us to begin with that, because if you go online and if you read literature about online learning, there will be many things that people will say about online learning. But I think the conversation this afternoon is basically about what we think we want to say as Ateneo. Di ba? Parang ano ba yung Ateneo version ng online learning? Ano ba yung pakay natin? Ano ba yung goal natin? Ano ba yung gusto nating mangyari sa mga learners natin pagdating sa online learning? No? So, if you've taught or you've been exposed to Jesuit schools before, the Jesuits will always remind us that in anything that we do, we should always begin with context. No, kailangan magsimula sa konteksto. Ano bang nangyayari ngayon? Ano ba yung panahon ngayon? No, and I think that when we step back and think about the premise for adaptive design for learning, even before we talk about strategies, even before we talk about principles, I think when we step back, it's really about recognizing the kind of context that we are in right now. No, I don't know if you've heard, how many have heard this term before, VUCA? No, so in the business world, they've been using this for quite a while. Sabi nila, when we describe our world today, and it's kind of it's weird in a sense that we can describe our current world like this, no? What they're beginning to say is that the world can be described as VUCA, standing for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. No? So if you look at yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago, diba, we celebrated, quote unquote, celebrated our 4 months in quarantine. No? So if you look back at the past 4 months, I think both in personal and professional ways, we can relate to these 4 words, no? That volatile. Ano ba nangyayari, di ba? Parang ano bang announcement ang i-announce ngayon? GCQ ba? MGCQ? Kung ano bang CQ, di ba? Uncertain. Kailan mangyayari ito? Ano bang mangyayari? Complex. Parang, what do we do because of these things? And ambiguous. In these kinds of situations, it's hard to find what we will hold on to, ano panghahawakan natin kung nangyayari itong mga to, no? So, volatile because of instability, usually due to the many changes that are happening. Uncertain because the future seems to be unpredictable. Complex because the realities that we face right now are multifaceted, no? Ang daming mga bagay na nag-interact, ang daming mga bagay na kailangan na i-consider. and ambiguous. It could be confusing for a lot of us. And maybe this is one of the reasons why challenging might have been the biggest word in our word cloud this afternoon, diba? Na parang, if you're facing a world like this, where do you begin? No? Where do you begin? Where do I start? No? Kung ang alam natin ay marami tayong hindi alam, saan tayo magsisimula? No? So, I think that when we crafted the ADL, this was really at the backdrop of it, that we wanted to recognize not just the current context, not just the pandemic, but to recognize where education is situated right now. What is the current context of education? Because even outside the pandemic, even if the pandemic did not happen, I think that we can still say that we've been living in a VUCA world, a world with many changes, no? A world that is so dynamic, a world wherein what you teach right now might be outdated in a few years' time and things like that. No? So we go broadly, no? And I think that one of the things that might be extra challenging might really be this, that when we think about the VUCA world that we're in right now, the VUCA situation we're in right now, Father Johnny would say, we are building the bridge as we get there. No? Ano ibig sabihin yan? No? Na parang usually you build a bridge before you cross it. But right now, we don't have time to build a bridge. No? So parang we can't spend a whole year thinking about, reflecting about, diba? Parang talking about online learning before we actually start doing it. No? We had a few months. And I say had because for the few months, it's almost done, no? It's almost time to meet our students. And for us in the Loyola schools, we already started our intersession fully online. So I'm already currently teaching some students fully online in my grad class. No? So I think this is important to recognize because sometimes we get OC about things, diba? Parang hindi, planuhin natin lahat, no? Bago natin gawin. But then the reality is we can only plan so much because we only know so much. So what is important? Given these things that might make us anxious, that might make this particular shift challenging, in the Ateneo Blue Cloud, which is our general brand for how we want to do online learning, we think that we need to come together as a community to have a shared language, a shared philosophy, a shared framework, and a shared message about what we hope for online learning to be. And I guess the pitch this afternoon is the key framework or the central framework that we hope we want to gravitate to is what we call adaptive design for learning. So, inimbento lang namin yung adaptive design for learning. So if you start Googling it, wala naman siyang very specific literature. But as we go through the presentation, you'll notice that it does sound like a lot of the things that we get from literature. Of course, a lot of this is research-based after all. So, saan ba galing yung term na adaptive? If for those of you who are techie, I don't know if you might have heard this before, the word adaptive is actually a term often used in web design or user experience design. For a typical user who's not IT savvy, you probably have been experiencing adaptive if, for example, if you're on your mobile device, for example, when you're browsing through something in portrait mode and when you switch it to horizontal mode, the website changes, diba? Or for example, when you're browsing through a website on a desktop, it looks slightly different when you're browsing on a mobile phone, diba? And mainly because the mobile phone has usually a smaller screen than a desktop, and so the buttons usually become smaller, the text becomes bigger, so on and so forth. No? So what you've experienced there, what you often experience there is what we call adaptive design. No? And we thought that that would be a great analogy for what we hope learning to be in an online learning scenario. We want online learning to be adaptive to the different contexts, no? Because di ba nagsimula tayo sa context, no? That when you think about our students, they all come from different contexts. No? So of course, the obvious context might be some of them are on a desktop, some of them are on a laptop, some of them are on a mobile device. But the less obvious but equally important context might be some of them might not have fast internet connection, diba? Some of them might not even have a nice space where they can learn at home, diba? Some of them might be taking care of 3 kids while they're learning. So a lot of these contexts, and because context is moving or movable, it seems to be moving a lot. We thought that when we describe what we hope to happen, adaptive would be a great way to describe it. And hopefully, in today's presentation, you'll exit with a greater appreciation of what we mean. So, for this afternoon, I'd like to share with you the 5 principles that we think begin to frame what we mean by adaptive design for learning. No? Adaptability, modularity, asynchronous and asynchronous. We'll talk about that in a short while. Active and interactive learning, and the 3 C's of online learning. Now, these are 5 different topics. We have a whole course about it. So I hope this doesn't feel too fast, but I picked out some specific points for us to talk about as regards each particular principle. No? So I hope that masabayan naman natin. So the first principle is adaptability. So building on our analogy of technology, the way technology, the way websites change, diba, from one device to another, what we're talking about is that hopefully when we design our online learning, or when we design whatever learning experience for our students in this VUCA context, we begin with a basic design. What do you mean by a basic design? Each school will probably decide on what their basic design is. I think for Ateneo, it's been decided on that our basic design is online learning on Google Classroom. Tama naman ako, diba? That you'll be using Google Classroom. Yeah. So if you think about creating modules on Google Classroom, then that's what you call your basic design. So when we design online learning, we usually start with the basic design. Again, across Ateneo, our basic design seems to be online learning. For example, here, this is a snapshot from my actual course right now, an education course I'm teaching. And we're using Canvas, a different learning management system. But then it presumes the same basic design. No? So the basic design is that I'm assuming that the average typical student will have access to the internet. And so since the student has access to the internet and a device, then I can generally rely on online learning as a modality. All right? But when we talk about adaptability, we also recognize that apart from the basic design, we should begin to also think about other layers. No? So the lower layers are usually what we call the low bandwidth versions and the learning packages. No? So what do you mean by this? So when we talk about adaptability, we consider the different types of access that our students have. So for example, when you start teaching and you find out that you have, let's say, 5 students out of your 40 students in the class who have very low bandwidth, no? Or whose internet connection only works, I don't know, 1 hour every day. Diba? So if you recognize that you have students like that, then you might need to include some low bandwidth versions in your design. No? I'll give you an example. For example, if you remember the screenshot I showed you a while ago, here in this particular content in my course, I created a lecture video. So I uploaded the lecture video there. But then you'll see that I have a button here that says download video transcript. No? So when I think about the low bandwidth version, that's one simple way of coming up with a low bandwidth version. If you were, let's say, to give students video watching homework, maybe it would be prudent to also have a transcript. No? So if you're getting it from YouTube, it's a little simple because on YouTube, you can actually get the transcript there. No? If it's a lecture that you created yourself, then you can share your lecture notes or you can transcribe your own lecture. But I think the transcript allows for this lower layer, this low bandwidth layer, that for students who are having difficulty in terms of bandwidth, in terms of internet connectivity, they might want to read the transcript instead of watching the video. Of course, the experience will be different. Arguably, the experience might be less engaging, but then it's really accommodating a different layer within the same course. No? So thinking about low bandwidth versions of your course. So transcription is one specific way to do that. In Google Classroom, let me just stop this and then share with you something else. In Google Classroom, one very helpful tip that I've learned about, if I can do a quick demo. You can see my Google Classroom. Not yet. Sige, wait lang. Yeah, you can see my screen, Google Classroom. Yes, great. So in Google Classroom, I don't know if you've explored this before. One thing that is built in Google Classroom that I think is so helpful in terms of adaptability is this button over here, Class Drive Folder. I don't know if you've tried this before. When you click this, basically everything that you put in your Google Classroom, it puts in a particular folder. It consolidates in a particular folder, even without you sorting it yourself. No? So this is pretty awesome because if you're able to do this, that means that if you're worrying about adaptability, then that's one very simple way of making your class adaptive. No? That you can actually just, if, for example, if you have 5 students who have difficulty in connecting to the internet, you can actually teach them how to go to the folder, and they can download all the materials beforehand so that they can view it offline. No? it's quite convenient because as you build on Google Classroom, you're not worrying about that, diba? You're just worrying about building your topics on Google Classroom and your content. But then in that folder, everything is there. No? So if someone needs to work on it offline, then a student can actually download the whole folder. No? So I think that's a convenient feature that you might want to look into in terms of adaptability. So as you can see here, we're beginning to form an image related to adaptability, conveniently shaped like an A. So in the lower layer, we said it's the low bandwidth version, diba? But then above your basic design, in terms of adaptability, what we also want to say is we also want to recognize that there also needs to be a contextualized layer. What do we mean by contextualized layer? I know that as we shift to online learning, a lot of us have been team designing. I don't know if you've been doing that, no? Meaning, for example, if let's say 3 of us are teaching English for grade 7, we're building the course together. Kumbaga, para for example, I'll do video number 1, you do video number 2, so that we can share the work of creating content. And I think that's great, no? And in your basic design, that could be really a core design of your course or of your class. But then when you begin to actually deliver, so to speak, when you begin to actually run the class with students, it's important to recognize that adaptability is not just in terms of the design, not just in terms of second guessing all of the things that that your students might need, but it's also about being able to adjust to your particular students. No? So I'll give you some examples. So when you talk about the contextualized layer, one thing might be to contextualize it in your voice as a teacher. And I think as teachers, minsan this is our worry, diba? Na parang we all have our own voice. Diba? You're a gamer, you like talking about games and using it in your class. Paano yan kung generic na tayong lahat, diba? So ang sagot dyan, hindi naman kailangan na maging generic tayo lahat. No? So for example, I teach a course right now called Edoc 251, and I'm not the only teacher teaching it. So maybe my other co-teachers will share my syllabus, will be able to use certain content that we share, but then I also want to put my own personality there. No? So for example, one thing that I like doing in my class is sharing stories about my kid. So this is my kid, Asher. He's 3 years old now. And I always begin my modules like this. I'll share a short anecdote about him that's related to the topic. No? So feel free to still contextualize with your voice, no? Because I think that's important. And sa totoo lang, baka yan yung ma-miss ng mga students, di ba? Parang they want to learn from a teacher. They don't want to learn from a website, no? So we don't want to sound like a blog that sounds the same all throughout, no? Parang so allow your voice to be heard. Allow your voice to be heard. Contextualize whatever content when you actually implement it in class. Another way of contextualizing is to also make sure that you monitor student progress and you make adjustments along the way. No? So for example, again, this is a screenshot from the current class I'm running. As you can see, I created asynchronous module release schedules, meaning these are the in these particular dates and times, I will open particular modules. No? But then what happened in the past 2 weeks is that I've been monitoring activity that after 2 weeks into the course, a lot of my students are still in module 1. So mali yung assumption ko that the 2 weeks are actually enough for them to actually complete module 1. No? So when you begin to see these things, hopefully the invitation is also to adapt. No? Not necessarily to change everything that's happening in your course, no? But first of all, to find out what's happening. Why are your students lagging behind? No? Why aren't they able to do the assignments? And then second, maybe you can make some adjustments accordingly without sacrificing, of course, the most important content of your course and whatever it is that you need to reinforce so that you can help them meet their learning outcomes. No? So adaptability is a principle not just in terms of design. So it's not just second guessing all the modalities that might be necessary, but it's hopefully also a principle in terms of delivery, that when we run our course, we become adaptive to our students as well. So ayan. So in synchronous learning scenarios, it's pretty bad that I keep on rambling on and on and on for several minutes. So I will pause for a while and ask you a question. So I know you have access to chat. So over chat, can you please just answer this question with whatever that comes to mind? So given the first principle of adaptability, what do you think might be concerns in terms of making your classes adaptable? So just based on what you know so far about what we're talking about in terms of adaptability, what do you think might be concerns or challenges? Sige. Wait time, and then in a few seconds, please post some insights over chat, or some of your answers over chat. When the class is about processing the class's answers real time. Okay. Mahirap din yun, no? Kasi parang you're on the spot. Thank you, Mark. So I'll wait for a couple of answers. Okay, engaging all students and making it inclusive. Okay, definitely, no? So that inclusivity is one of the core principles that adaptability actually builds on. Diba? Thinking about all your students. One strategy there is starting your first week by finding out as much as you can. No? For example, one of the first things I did in my course was to field an access survey, where I asked them, what does your internet connection look like? What do you use? Do you use a shared device? What type of device are you using? So if you don't have those information yet, you might want to do a survey in the beginning, no, to find out. Because you also want to make sure that you don't over-prepare. Diba? For example, what if there's no one in your class who actually needs the transcription? But then you spend hours and hours, diba? Ang lalaki na ng eye bags ninyo kasi lahat ng video na pinakita niyo sa kanila, tinatranscribe ninyo. Diba? Baka hindi naman kailangan. No? So it's good to engage with your students and communicate with them to find out the viability of the home as a conducive place for learning. Yes, definitely. No? Parang that seems to be a challenge. And unfortunately, there is little that we can do with it. No? But I think as teachers, one thing we can do is to help advise students, guide students to make sure that they come up with their routine in the beginning, in their first week of class. No? For them to find a place, to find a specific time where that's most conducive for them in learning. And Tanya, sige, last na, para walang pressure sa iba. Lack of discipline, no? Yes, tunay yan, no? Totoo yan, na talagang this assumes a lot of self-management. But I think that in basic ed, what you're doing is a little different from what we're doing, no? Because, for example, in higher ed, technically, we teachers, we're kind of free to structure how we want the course to be, meaning, like I only meet my class 3 times within the semester synchronously. The rest is asynchronous. No? But I think that within the basic ed, you have more structures, which I think is important, no? Because you have students who might not be able to make that decisions as well as adults, no? Arguably speaking. No? Sige. So alam naman kasi natin, pati sa atin, challenge to. So hopefully begin to think about adaptability. No? Think about the different things that you need to consider in terms of adaptability. So allow me to move to the second principle, no? Modularity. Now, modularity, coming from the root word module, is really about shifting from designing your class or course as a whole term to modular design. No? What do you mean by this? Typically, when we design a course, this is what we follow. For most teachers, it's called teach now, test later. Ano yan? Yung parang, I'll just teach. At the end of the semester, I will test. Diba? Parang that sounds very typical of a teaching scenario or of the way we design, diba? To be honest. No? So the call here in design principle number 2 is to reconsider this kind of design and to consider a new paradigm, which is modular design. No? To design your course into discrete and meaningful chunks, basically to divide your course or your term into chunks. For example, you're teaching math for 1 trimester. You know how many weeks that is, but then you design it in chunks, no? You design it in parts. And to make sure that there are checkpoints along the way. So to help you understand this, I'll show you an example. No? So if we were to do a 1-sentence definition of what we mean by modularity, maybe we can say it like this, no? That modularity presupposes that you design modules framed by what we call competences. Okay, I think for you might call these learning outcomes. No, I think that might be one of a more common language, and evidences of learning assessments. No? So the key question here, as a designer or as a teacher designing modules, is when I design my modules, how can I design it in such a way that my modules are aligned to particular competences and particular assessments actually help me provide evidence that my students have been able to meet those particular competences that I set out for them. So there are two key terms that I think begin to frame this discussion. The first one I mentioned a while ago. It's called competence. No, it's different from competency. We won't get into that today. But for your perspective, again, you can call these learning outcomes. No, but then good learning outcomes are really learning outcomes that allow you to find evidence that point towards what you want students to be able to do with what they learn. No, these are usually your reflection or action goals. So, for example, you're teaching a science class, your competence should begin to articulate what is it that you want students to end up with. Okay, so not just knowing the facts, but if they know the facts, if they have those knowledge, they have those skills, what does it add up to? How do you want them to be able to use it, most especially in authentic scenarios? And again, when we talk about assessments, these are really evidences of competences. No? That when you articulate a competence really well, thinking about your assessments usually is pretty fairly easy as well. So again, when you talk about modularity, the attempt here is to design a course wherein you say that, okay, these are the competences that I want for my students, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the assessments that I hope to provide as evidence. They will provide us evidence of meeting these competences. And then these are the modules that I think will help them learn or move towards these particular competences. No? So what is the rationale behind modularity? If you remember the beginning of this conversation, we talked about context and we talked about the VUCA world. And one of the challenges in the VUCA world is really interruption. No? That, for example, right now, what we know is we're doing online. No? But what if midway, the government says, pwede nang pumasok? Diba? You could do face-to-face instruction already. Hala, what will we do? Diba? What will we do? So if we're using a whole course design paradigm, it's so hard to answer the question, what will we do? But if we're using a modular paradigm, then we can do something like this. Okay, so we're about to close module 2. Then maybe let's just close module 2 fully online, and starting module 3, we'll do it blended. Or starting module 3 will shift face-to-face. Diba? So it becomes easier to shift from one modality to another because you did design it as a whole course such that pag pinutol mo sa gitna, parang hindi mo na alam kung saan magsisimula, saan matatapos, no? Because you've designed it in a way that that we use Lego bricks, for example, no? That you've designed it in such a way that you know that, let's say, competence number 1 is aligned to module 1 and 2, and as long as students are able to meet these assessments, this proves to me that they are able to attain competence number 1. Okay? So it allows you supposedly some flexibility. So again, just to show some examples, this is from my course. Sorry, these are higher ed examples, but I'm sure you can easily relate to it. So these are my learning outcomes for my media and technology class. So I have 4. And then when I design my modules, in the Loyola schools, we're required to align it to particular learning outcomes. No? So for example, if my students do module 2, what this tells me is that I have actually taught towards course learning outcome number 4. And if we interrupt classes then, and if I'm able to assess module number 2, then it's clear to me that the skill under digital responsibility and equity is something that I've already gained. No? So parang tapos na yan. No? Malinaw sa akin na tapos na yan. And I can move on to the next module. No? So when you design it modularly, then these things become a little more transparent, no? Rather than a whole course design wherein, it's like a journey tapos surprise at the end yung paano ma-assess or paano natin malalaman kung nakuha nga ba ng mga students natin yung gusto nating makuha nila. So, something that you can think about is really how similar or different is this, no, from how you currently design for your teaching. So, again, I'll pause for a few seconds. No? So, given what you heard about modularity, how similar or different is it to how you're used to designing, no? Or if you're a first-time teacher, your notion of what designing a course or a unit or a class looks like. Sige. So I'll give you a few seconds. Again, huwag kayong mahiya. Punta kayo sa chat. Para may kausap naman ako. Share some insights there to your answer to these questions. No? So, iba ba siya? Pareho ba siya? What is similar or what is different as opposed to what you're used to? Sige. So I'll give you some wait time and allow you to think about this first and then put some notes over chat. All right. So meron bang gusto sumagot? Sige lang, feel free. Tayo-tayo lang naman, no? Konti lang tayo, 18 lang tayo dito, di ba? Huwag kayong mahiya. So do you find this similar or different? Do you find this new or no? What is it that you find familiar and unfamiliar? Thanks, Janelia. No, so Janelia said that in her previous teaching experience, they have 2 sessions per subject, lecture and discussion. So if let's say the way the lecture and discussion are grouped is in a way modular, then that might sound similar. No, that might sound similar. So I think the key in a modular design is that what puts the module together. No? And I think the simple way of thinking about it is it's really the competence and the assessment that puts the module together. Kumbaga sila yung bihis, no? Sila yung packaging ng isang module. No? So yun. So magandang pag-isipan yan. Sige, wala nang gustong mag-chat. Sige, fine. Okay. So, lipat na tayo sa third principle. So, the third principle is about asynchronous and synchronous discussions. So, I'm sure that you've heard these terms before, but just as a review and to make sure we recognize the same thing, ito yun mga yan, no? When you talk about online learning, there are 2 kinds of activities that students will engage in, asynchronous activities and synchronous activities. No? Asynchronous activities are individual reading, watching, listening activities, for example, online discussions that they will post, for example, assignments, diba? And then synchronous activities are things like this, live chats, video conferences. No? So, sige, ito gusto ko ng konting audience participation. So, over chat, can you just share with me some examples of what you think will be best done synchronously or asynchronously? So what you'll put over chat is, for example, first thing that comes to mind, for example, quiz. So put over chat, let's say quiz dash, let's say synchronous or sync. Kung tingin nyo dapat synchronous yan. Or for example, quiz dash asynchronous if you think that asynchronous might be better for that kind of activity. So think of the different activities that students will do online, and then share with us if you think it's better done synchronously or asynchronously. Sige. Please use your fingers. Type some insights there. We'll just do a quick survey just to see what people think. So just pick any random activity that comes to mind, like lecture. Okay. So should the lecture be synchronous or asynchronous? Quiz, should the quiz be synchronous or asynchronous? Okay, I can see some examples here. Thank you. Discussion, mentoring, consultation, synchronous. Lectures, more personal if done synchronously. Okay, but better than asynchronously given a situation. Programming demonstrations, asynchronous. Okay. Reading, watching, prep work, asynchronous. Okay, synchronous, processing, calibrating, lectures and Q&A. Okay, paper presentation, synchronous, reading, asynchronous. Interesting. Essays, synchronous. Joke lang. Okay. Nagets ko yun. Asynchronous. Reading assignments. Okay, sige. So, makikita nyo, no, there are some similarities about where we're coming from. So, in this third principle, we think about what should be asynchronous and what should be synchronous. No? And there's this article, I can forward you the link later on if you're interested, that begins to help us demystify this decision making. No? That, for example, when you talk about when you're tackling a complex issue, when you want students to tackle a complex issue, then it usually takes time. So it's better asynchronous. So for example, mahirap siyang intindihin na konsepto. Parang mas okay siya na asynchronous. No? Na it's good to allow your students the time to process and to think about it. Because when they're allowed the time to process, then there's no pressure for them to process right away. So for example, if I ask you, parang kanina, di ba? I've been asking you questions, but baka yung iba sa inyo na on the spot, na parang, teka lang, gusto kong pag-isipan to. Makikita na yung pangalan ko pag nag-chat ako, di ba? So, ganun din, no? Ganun din yung students natin that if it is something that you want them to think about more, then maybe do it asynchronously. That's the advice of this research. For example, through email, discussion boards, blogs, so on and so forth. No? But if it's less complex and if the goal is, let's say, to get acquainted with them, to plan tasks together, for example, talking to them about their class project, I think it's better to set up a synchronous discussion about that, because there might be some questions that pop up along the way as you talk about the procedure, di ba? Or for example, you want them to discuss their opinion about a specific thing, di ba? Parang, okay, you can do it asynchronously, but then sometimes doing it synchronously might be better because people can build on each other's ideas and people can react to each other in a timely manner. No? Why should you do it synchronously? Some activities, because students become more committed and motivated because of a quick response. But then if the quick response is not necessarily the intention, your instructional intention, then do it asynchronously. No? Another way of looking at it is this diagram here. I found this quite helpful. This comes from the article. Basically, that when you're thinking about cognitive participation, meaning you want students to process, to think about it. No, that's why I agree here that, for example, lectures are ideally asynchronous, in fact, no, because in lectures, in a typical lecture, if the intention of the lecture is to convey a particular content. So this is not actually the best way to do it. No, that it would have actually been better if I sent you a lecture instead of having you listen to me right for a few minutes without you needing to actually participate. No, but then if the goal is personal participation, if the goal is for us to make meaning together. That's why if you notice that in my slides, I would often pause and ask questions, diba? Because I'm very conscious that I'm in a synchronous environment, no? So if my goal is just to tell you something, I could have just sent you an email, no? But hopefully it's a discussion, no? Hopefully it's an exchange of ideas, no? And when you make judgments between asynchronous and synchronous, these are some 3 things that you might want to consider and when thinking about these things. Student access. No? So for example, I think most especially in the Philippines, this is one of the major considerations, no? That because of student access, in fact, in Ateneo, we actually are campaigning for more asynchronous than synchronous, mainly because you can't be assured that everyone will be able to connect, not just because they can't afford to connect, but sometimes and more often than not because of the technical aspect of it, that they cannot connect technically, no? Na-disconnect sila, so on and so forth. No? So if it's important content that you're talking about, they will miss out on it. No? They will miss out on it. So learner access is one important consideration. The second one is learner autonomy. If you're teaching younger learners, sometimes you might want to do more synchronous to help them process things, then just leave them on their own. For older learners, at least the assumption is they're more independent. No? But again, I say the assumption is because you have to gauge with your learners. No? So you might notice that maybe in junior high school, you might frame your learning experience with synchronous sessions. I think I saw some of the schedules look like that. Diba? Now you start with a synchronous session, and then you have asynchronous activities, and then maybe you have another synchronous session or something like that. No? What you're really trying to do there is you're managing learner autonomy. That because you started with a synchronous session, you help frame, you're telling your learners, okay, mag-aaral tayo ngayon from this point hanggang this point, no? 1 hour tayo. Okay? But then you don't need to be online all the time, no? That they can do a task and then you can check in on them. No? So you have to gauge depending on learner autonomy or the autonomy of your particular students. Or finally, to gauge it based on the task. No? Again, when you look at the research, if it's a cognitive task, it's often better asynchronous. If it's a task that will benefit from personal participation, it's often better synchronously. No? So again, these are not hard and fixed to-dos if you recognize it. No? But more than anything, these are guidelines. So how you will apply it to your case will be different from how I might apply it to my case and to my context. So looking at the examples that you put here and the lenses that I introduced, no? So maybe you can begin to see some connections and disconnections between your current notion about what might work better synchronously and your current notion about what might work better asynchronously. Okay, last 2 principles. The second to the last principle is called active and interactive learning. And this is really more than anything a reminder that, and I like, if you go back to the word cloud a while ago, one of the key terms that you highlighted was student-centered learning. Di ba? Ang galing. And I'm really glad that that was highlighted because that is the intention, hopefully, when we create online courses that we want students to engage with and when we facilitate courses with them. That it's not about the technology, but about student-centered learning. So the goal is not necessarily to be the most techie teacher, di ba? Na parang, di ba, sa isang module, guys, 10 apps yung ginamit ko, di ba? Hindi paramihan ng apps to. Di ba? Parang hindi to nadadaan sa apps or hindi to nadadaan sa paramihan ng tools na ginagamit mo. So for those of you who tell yourself that you're not as techy, okay lang, no? Because I think at the core of it is really designing student-centered learning experiences. In the ADL, this is how we frame it, no? That what we say is that when we talk about active and interactive learning, it's not just about students receiving content from us. And sometimes in online learning, that this could be a pitfall, no? That we get so obsessed with creating videos, di ba? Mamaya pag-usapan natin yan in a while, no? But then it's not just about them watching our videos, eh. It's us designing what that experience looks like for them. What do you mean? When you create a video and you have students watch it, what's happening there in the learning experience is that students are watching your video. And if students are watching your video, what is the intention there? What do you hope to happen? And I think this is the question that active and interactive learning poses to you. How do you want students to learn? No? Before, there was a very helpful exercise that a teacher taught me. Sabi niya, one way by which you can really meet student-centered learning is you rewrite your whole lesson plan from the perspective of a student. No? For example, usually kasi when we write our lesson plans, we write what we present, di ba? Para I present about topic A, B, C, D, and then I give an exercise and then topic D, E, F, G, di ba? But what if you rewrite it from the perspective of the student? So the first part is the students listen to me for 30 minutes talking about A, B, C, and D. The second part, di ba? The students answer this question and then you frame the question. So think about it from the perspective of your learners, no? And when you think about it from the perspective of your learners, hopefully the learning experience that we design is not just content dumping, but an experience wherein you give students opportunities to investigate, to also figure things out, to actively participate in the learning process, to create things, to collaborate, to contemplate, to reflect, okay, to make connections, and to also communicate what they're learning. No? So if you look at these 8s, so we call them the 8s because all of them end with letter A, T, and E. When you look at these 8s, these are really opportunities that we present, that what we hope for you to think about, that pushes you to think of how you want students to participate. No? How do you want students to be part of the learning process? No? So for those who might not have been exposed to student-centered learning before, it's quite a different paradigm because it's not operating in the traditional paradigm wherein learning is the teacher transferring information from my head to your head. No? It's about me thinking about how you're learning and me facilitating how that will happen. So I think this is a timely reminder, no? So it's not just this, no? So it's not just the foundation that you bought para maganda kayo sa video or the ring light that you just bought. Not to offend people who bought ring lights. Okay lang yan, no? So not just this, but also this, no? So don't just thinking about what you're going to do, but thinking about, but more importantly, think about what your students will do. That while they're watching your well-lit video, what do you want them to be thinking about? Okay, what is the purpose of that? What do you want them to connect to? Right? So here's another. So the key idea here is to really make a shift from content delivery. We use that a lot to content design. No? Bakit iba yun? No? Kasi when you talk about content delivery, there's always this notion that I'm delivering something. No? Meaning, di ba, parang nagpa-deliver ka ng bagay, in-order mo, tapos binigay sa'yo, tapos nakuha mo na, di ba? But we know that learning is not like that. No? We don't just deliver learning. Like when I say things right now, and when you hear it, it's not automatic that you're getting it. It's not automatic that you will use it in your life. No, it's just me talking about it. So instead of thinking about content, hopefully you shift from thinking about content to thinking about activities. No, which might mean that if you plan to send a 20-minute video for students to just listen to, that might mean breaking that 20-minute video down into a set of learning experiences, no? That before you have them watch the video, magtanong muna kayo ng something relevant para ma-connect nila dun sa video. After watching the video, magtanong kayo para maintindihan nyo kung ano ba yung na-gets nila sa video, diba? Parang, so you have to shift from merely just delivering content to designing content. And I think that's the invitation in active and interactive learning. Another way of putting it is to consistently think about what students will do, not just what the teacher does or what the students will see. Okay? Uh, I showed this screenshot because this is a pretty recent example. I created this module a few weeks back for my graduate school class. So I recorded a 30-minute lecture and then sabi ko parang, nako, hindi to papasa sa ADL. So what I did instead was this 30-minute lecture that has 3 main topics. I chopped it into 3 parts. So it's still one big topic, but I chopped it into 5 to 10-minute chunks. So it's now 3 chunks. So students will watch part 1, part 2, and then part 3. But in between the chunks, I ask a question for students to think about. So even that little tweak will change things, no? Because that little tweak acknowledges that students will not easily absorb 30 minutes of input right away, no? Or three main topics right away, that you'll need to help them process. That sometimes slowing down is actually better than moving fast. No? In a world today wherein we want everything fast, sometimes slowing down makes some sense. All right, so the key idea is less us, more them, no? Student-centered learning. That Seymour Papert talks about this quote, no? That's very interesting. He said, children were born as learners. They learned from their own energy until they went to school. And when they went to school, the first thing they had to learn was to stop learning and begin being taught. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this. And I think that this is very significant because what this reminds us of also is that most probably, your students will hate it. Most probably, they will quote unquote hate it because there's more work for them, di ba? Kasi instead of you just telling them, tatanong pa kayo, di ba? Parang instead of just one activity, just watch this video, you want to ask a question, you want them to think about it, and then you want them to watch a video, di ba? Because you're slowing down learning. No? But what we know from research on learning is that that's actually more effective. That quicker is not always better. That processing these things, breaking things down is actually what will make learning happen more deeply. So the key idea is, what is the difference between content delivery and content design? No? When you're thinking about designing online learning experiences, what do you think? The second is coach, the teacher, and the third is community, the presence or interaction among students. No? So content are basically in an online learning setting. They're the lectures, readings, videos, other materials and activities that you design for students to actually interact with. The coach is the instructor's presence and interaction. No? Mahalaga to because we know that learning is still, what we know from literature is that learning is still social, no? And so we have to be present as teachers. And the last bit is community, the class or the group of fellow learners, that since they're taking these courses, these classes as a cohort, how can you maximize that? What can you do? Okay, so I'll just give a few examples. So before the examples, one way to situate the 3 C's is this, no? That when you talk about online learning, there are actually 3 ways by which people do online learning. So the first way is the one on the left, the first column. It's called remote teaching. So what does remote teaching look like? Meet me at 9 a.m. every day, and then I will teach you. No? So that's called remote teaching. So basically making each session as a video conference as if it was a face-to-face scenario. Now, remote teaching is not necessarily bad, most especially if you do it well, if you teach really well in a synchronous session. But then we know, based on the adaptability, that that's not necessarily best. No? And we also know, coming from literature that we talked about earlier, is that if the goal is to get students to think, pure synchronous remote teaching will not always be best. On the right-hand corner, the third column, you have remote self-study. Ito naman, on the other hand, is the teacher that says, all right, here are 5 YouTube videos. Panoorin nyo na lang. Okay na yan. Di ba? Matututo na kayo dyan. Di ba? So that's called remote self-study. Just posting some assignments and then bahala na yung students. No? Or it could be a little more structured. No? So if you've heard of MOOCs or massive open online courses, ito mga sa Coursera, wherein you never interact with the teacher. That's called remote self-study. No? So you just go through a posted list of assignments, readings, videos, whatsoever. No? Again, it's not necessarily bad, but remote self-study is heavily only about content. Okay, the other two C's are not easily available. So what we're hoping for is what we say is good online learning, which is a good balance between content, coach, and community. A balance between the teacher being present, uh, still feeling the presence of classmates, and well-designed content, of course. So here are some some tips that might help in terms of coach. Replying to discussion forums is the basic thing. No, you don't need to be able to read my screenshot. Sorry, I omitted my students' names also for data privacy. But basically, as you reply to them, even if it's asynchronous, then you make your presence felt. No, you get to process some things. Sorry, you get to process some things. They see you replying. You acknowledge that they're actually reading their posts. No? Another strategy in terms of coaching is coming up with a regular digest. So for example, if you're handling many students, let's say 40 students, it's so tedious to reply to each one of them. No? Nakakapagod yun. No? So you don't actually need to reply to each one of them. It's good to reply to a majority of them as much as you can. But another strategy is, let's say at the end of the week, to come up with a digest to synthesize what you've gotten from their responses. No? So to say things like, for example, this week, I think there are 5 key ideas that emerge in our discussion forum. Or let's say this week, these are 2 insights that I'm reading from your posts and 2 questions that I think we need to continue to clarify. So it's a way for you to sort of clarify misconceptions, synthesize. But in terms of coaching, what you're also doing here is you're reminding students that you're actually reading. No? Because as soon as your students feel like you're not reading, then that's the end of it. No? You will notice that their posts become less, they post less, and at the same time, the quality of the posts will also dwindle. No? Another strategy is to set up consultation hours. And I know that within your schedule, you have something like this, no? To be available even in asynchronous sessions. For example, in my class right now, I set up these consultation hours so that even if we're not having a conversation like this with my class, they know that Wednesdays, 8 to 12 a.m., 8 to 12 noon rather, if they have a question, I'll just be around. Meaning if they email me, I will respond right away. If they chat with me, I will respond right away. Or by appointment, they can actually set up a coaching session with me. So it's important to make this available and to reinforce this, no? Because sometimes some students will not avail of this, no? Mahihiya sila, more often than not. So you have to reach out to students who you think will need it and encourage them to set appointments with you if they need it, no? Because the good thing about online learning is that a lot of these things are transparent. Makita nyo naman who's lagging behind, who's not participating, who's not posting, who's posting haphazardly, di ba? Yung parang hindi pinag-isipan yung pinopost, post lang ng post, di ba? So, I think that's one of the benefits naman of online learning, that you're able to track these things. You have documentation of all of these things happening. And lastly, community. To have community, to make community alive, one thing that you can easily do is to prompt students to reply to each other. But when you do so, make sure you tell them what to respond, no? Or how to respond. So for example, usual quote-unquote unhelpful practice is to say, reply to another classmate. No? So kasi when you just say reply to another classmate, most probably sabihin nila parang, oy, okay to, G, or di ba parang like, or di ba parang nice one, di ba parang ano yun, di ba? Parang hindi nakatulong yun. So it's good that even if you ask them to reply to each other, you also give a prompt. So for example, a generic prompt that I use is add an insight or pose a question to one of your classmates' responses. No? So at least it forces them to actually read the response and to react significantly to the response. And not just to say, I like this, that's nice, cool nito, di ba? Parang okay naman yun, but parang kulang, di ba? You don't see the learning happening. And finally, in synchronous sessions, and you might want to consider this, hopefully it's not just like this. It's not just teacher to student, no? Hopefully it's also student to student. In my grad class currently, one of the things that they shared with me earlier in our discussion forum was they miss the voices of their classmates, no? They miss the expression of their classmates when their classmates attempt at answering a question. And I'm sure your students will miss that too, di ba? So when you have synchronous sessions, hopefully you can also consider that it's not just for them to hear your voice and for you to hear their voice, but hopefully they get to talk to each other as well, no? So for example, I know you're using Google Meet, di ba? If you're using Google Meet, unfortunately, wala pang breakout session feature yung Google Meet, no? So what you might want to do is, for example, if you have 2 hours allotted not to have everyone log in within the start of the 2 hours. Now, for example, the first 30 minutes, these 10 students only. The next 30 minutes, the next 10 students. So kumbaga hindi kailangan whole class lagi. So when you do synchronous discussions, it's always good to find a way to make the group smaller so that there's a greater chance that they will hear each other. No? So instead of doing, let's say, a 2-hour run, do 30 minutes each and then with smaller groups of students, no? Just to vary your synchronous sessions. So hopefully that's an idea that helps. Okay, so I'm winding down now, but I want to just ask a question about the 3 C's, no? Yung content, community, and coach. Which of the 3 C's at the moment do you think would be a strength for you? Na parang, kaya-kaya ko ito gawin. Lagi ko nang ginagawa ito kahit face-to-face. And which do you think might be a challenge for you? Na parang, hala, paano to? How will I do this? Most especially because we're online. Okay? So I'll give you a few minutes just to answer these questions over chat. Pwede na, no? Kung ayan, okay, great. So, content, okay, great, no? So, a lot of people see content as strength. That's good. Community is a challenge. Totoo yan, no? Because of scheduling, I guess, because it's so hard to organize groups, no? Online. You have to figure out what might be best. Okay, content also. Community rin yung challenge, no? Sige, we'll wait for a few more. Content and coaching. Great, no? Okay yun, no? Very Ateneo, no? Pura personalis. Mahalaga sa atin yan na coaching should be one of our strengths. Community. Okay. It seems like a lot of people feel like community will be a challenge, no? And it's quite realistic because grouping, diba? Parang how can you imagine grouping? We haven't really hacked that yet. So that might be something that hopefully we become more confident in later on. To be honest, in my experience in teaching online so far, one of the hardest for me is coaching. Kasi for example, even if it sounds easy, it's so hard to be as present in a class because, for example, if you have 20 students, imagine 20 posts in a discussion forum, and in a module, imagine, let's say, 5 different forums. Diba? So one guiding principle is if you don't intend to check it, don't ask them to post it anymore because you don't want to be asking so much from students, but then you're not able to reply to them as well. No? So just ask enough also for you to respond to. Another tip in terms of coach might be to also schedule your coaching. For example, kasi in online learning, sometimes one of the difficulties is parang you feel like you have to respond right away, di ba? Pag may nag-post, let's say you're using your mobile sa Google Classroom, and then a new post in this discussion forum, parang minsan feeling mo, kailangan mo talagang kausapin agad yung student, no? So we also have to watch out for our own mental health as teachers. Hindi tayo tatagal, guys. One way to do it is to also schedule your posts, no? In fact, one tip that I read from an article about online teaching is that at the beginning of a course or a class, a good practice is for the teacher to tell the students when they will be replying. For example, I will tell my students, I will always reply every Wednesday. So, kumbaga, you're setting the expectation that if you post things before Wednesday, most probably by Wednesday, you'll get a reply from me. But then if you post things after Wednesday, then you might not be able to get a reply right away. No? So you have to also think about your own routines, not just the routines of your students, because you have to keep your sanity. Diba? Parang, you can't be online all the time. Diba? You can't be available all the time as well. No? We have to also take care of ourselves. So when you think about the 5 principles of adaptive design for learning, one thing that you notice is that we're not telling you what to do. Diba? We're not saying, parang, ito yung gawin nyo, diba? Parang, kailangan 5 minutes lang, kailangan ganun. Parang, the 5 principles, more than anything, are guiding principles. No? And I think it's intentional that they're guiding principles because we want ADL to be an upstream solution. What's an upstream solution? So currently, I'm reading this book called Upstream. and the book begins with a story. No? So in the story, sabi niya, there are two adult men who are by the stream, like this, what you see in the picture. And then what happens in this story is that these two adult men hear a child screaming, asking for help. Parang, help, save me. And so what happens is that when they heard this first child, the two adult men swam downstream to save the child. So okay now, one child saved. After they saved the child, a second child screamed, no? Parang, help, help. And so they jumped in again and saved the second child. And then after that, a third child screamed, parang help, help. So what happened was adult number one swam downstream to save the child, while adult number two swam upstream. And so adult number one said, "Hey, adult number two, why did you swim upstream when the child is going to drown downstream?" So what adult number two said was, "I'm going to swim upstream to find out who has been throwing these children into the water." So parang yun yung sinabi niya, no? So who has been throwing these children into the water? And I think one of the basic concepts in this book, Upstream, is that when we design solutions, sometimes there's a tendency to design downstream solutions, meaning to design things reactively. Diba? I'll tell you what to do when this particular things happen. But then, if I tell you what to do for a very specific thing, what happens if that's not what happens? No? Wala na, diba? Parang you'll lose, you have nothing to hold on to. And if we go back to our initial context of the VUCA world, the solution we need for a VUCA world is really an upstream solution. No? And I think that's what the ADL attempts to be. That hopefully these 5 things become guiding principles for you as a teacher. But as a teacher, we're not telling you what to think, but hopefully the 5 principles guide your thinking. That when you encounter these things as you teach online, hopefully the 5 principles help frame questions and conversations about what to do. So it's not a framework to tell you what to do. It's a framework that can hopefully guide your thinking about how you'll address challenges moving forward and as you design and facilitate online learning. So I'd like to end with this last slide. So this is very similar to the analogy of the bridge, no? That the problem with the context that we're facing right now is that there's no predetermined path, no? So as we travel the path, we shape the path. So I'm stealing this from Father Johnny. He would always talk about this analogy of going through the forest, di ba? And when you go through the forest, yung parang sinasabak mo yung mga nasa harapan mo. So hindi mo pa alam kung ano yung wala pang path eh. Habang wala pang path, what you need to do is just to get things out of the way and just to begin to create your path. No? But then hopefully, the principles provide us with a destination. Diba? Hindi natin alam kung ano yung mga little decisions along the way, but we know what the big things that we want to hold on to are. We know what we want, how we want online learning to be, and hopefully that's enough to help shape our path. Okay, sige. So that's enough talking for me. So thank you for listening in the past few minutes. I hope that's given you a good sense of what adaptive design for learning is. Maybe we can just spend the remaining few minutes just to hear some questions, some clarifications, some insights that you might have gotten in our conversation. Silence means I don't know. Silence means
Floor is open for Q&A, or if you want to share anything to the group.
sige, questions, clarifications, violent reactions, insights, di ba? Aha moments, or let's say parang
Hello, sir.
or yeah, sige, go, yan.
I'm Christian Maricadar po from the Music Department, Junior High.
Thanks, Christian. Yes.
I just want to ask, kasi because of the online setup, I think it would be harder to do assessments. Though, syempre, pinag-usapan naman namin by issue department. Pero andun pa rin yung uncertainty na paano namin ma-ensure yung bata na gumagawa. Since online setup to, hindi gaya kapag face-to-face na talagang classroom setting, makikita mo, pwede mong pokpokin talaga yung bata, like figuratively, na pwede mo siyang, ano mo yun, sir? Pero ikaw kasi, may experience po kayo ngayon, sir, na nagtuturo na po kayo. Ngayon, paano nyo po na-assess yung mga bata na gumagawa pa rin sila and effective pa rin po. Kasi at the end of the day, kahit gaano kaganda yung magawa naming design, if hindi effective ang assessment, I don't think it would work. So ayun po sir, maraming salamat po. Ang ganda po ng talk. Thank you sir, solid po kayo.
Ay, salamat Christian. At salamat sa paglilinaw na figurative yung yung image nung sisimula. Anyway, joke lang. So I think that's a valid concern, and I think it's important to know where the concern is coming from. No? So una sa lahat, usually this kind of concern is coming from the experience of giving objective exams. No? So I think, di ba, yun yung elephant in the room, di ba? Parang pwede pa ba tayo mag-objective exam? Parang mahirap, sa totoo lang, mahirap mag-objective exams dahil kung sobrang objective exam, lalo na kung graded ito, we really cannot ascertain that it's actually the student doing it. No? Well, on the technical end, there's a way, but it's expensive and we don't have access to it right now. No? So let's just assume na wala muna tayo nung techie parang examiner, whatever tool na kung saan bubukas yung webcam every time nagko-quiz yung mga bata, so on and so forth, di ba? So there are some strategies though. So I'll share with you some strategies. So the one strategy that is helpful is to shuffle questions. So for example, I think in Google Classroom, in Google Forms, you can shuffle questions. Tama, no? Pwede, no? So shuffle questions, that's one strategy. The second strategy is to schedule exams. No? So we're still talking about objective exams here. No? So to schedule. For example, the quiz will happen from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. So scheduled siya. No? Because when you schedule it, there's a smaller chance of leakage at least. No? So that's the second. The third, and I'm not so sure if you can do this at the onset in Google Forms, there might be a plugin that will allow you to do it. To be honest, top of head, I don't know what plugin that is to use timed exams. No? So for example, the quiz will be from 9 to 10. Take it anytime within 9 to 10, but it's a 20-minute test. Meaning, 20 minutes lang talaga. So magko-close siya after 20 minutes. No? I can guess na baka may plug-in. Hindi ko lang alam kung ano yun. Sorry about that. But I'll try to research. I'll forward it to Jen later on. But if in case you can have those three elements, those are usually some strategies to help encourage academic integrity. Of course, this will not assure you of academic integrity. No? So very valid yung sinabi ni Christian. Maybe the second strategy might be to rethink the kind of assessments that you're asking for. So for example, sa'yo, music class, no? So I assume that internet permitting, diba? Having students play on video, for example, diba? Parang have them record themselves doing something on video will eliminate the identity issue. Because I think a lot of the issues in terms of assessments right now that are very much like what Christian mentioned are identity issues. Diba? Parang sila ba talaga ito? Diba? Parang sila ba talaga yung gumagawa? And another strategy is when you give assessments, for example, writing assessments, again, it's very similar to the strategy of trying to veer away from overly objective assessments. Try to ask questions that are reflective, that will ask them to share about something that is unique to them. Diba? Because that will also help push and make sure na they're not just copying from each other when they submit something. Unfortunately, though, there's no 100%, to be honest, no? There's no 100% foolproof, sure shot way to make sure that it's actually your students. Again, apart from the techie measures. Kasi may mga techie measures eh. Like, merong mga platform na kung bibilin natin, biglang magbubukas yung webcam every time nagko-quiz sila. Mga ganyan, no? But, we don't have access to those technologies at the moment. So, we might need to do other things, no? And then maybe to address one of the things that Christian mentioned, na paano mo malaman kung, di ba, assessment is very important, and I agree with that, no? Maybe in terms of using assessment as a way to check kung natututo ba talaga sila, kung nangyayari ba talaga yung learning, my suggestion is instead of coming up with one-time, big-time assessments, come up with small ones. Small but recurring ones, di ba? And I think that if most probably you've been talking about formative assessments as another assessment. No? So more than any time, I think formative assessments play a big role because the formative assessments really become your, ang image ko dyan para siyang pins in a map, di ba? Parang they're your pins in your map. Eh. Parang ito yung gusto mong matutunan nila, pero paano mo nalalaman kung nagagawa na nila yon, di ba? And I think that's the role of assessments, to begin to put pins in your learning journeys map. what are the pins that you put there? And these pins need not be big pins. They need not be projects all the time, diba? They could be as simple as, I don't know, if you're teaching guitar, playing this chord. Ganyan lang, diba? If you're a language teacher, I don't know, reading something or coming up with a 5-minute spontaneous speech, I don't know, or a 1-minute thing, diba? Don't overdo it. No? Minsan kasi sometimes there's a tendency to overdo it. Mas ang kawawa kayo, no? So for example, if you ask them to do a 10-minute speech, tapos 40 yung students niyo, grabe, no? Wala na, parang puyat-puyat na tayong lahat. No? Times the number of sections that you're handling, diba? So, do enough. I think that's the guiding principle there. I hope I was able to help you, Christian. Hindi siya 100%, pero sana nakatulong yung ilang mga tips.
Yes, sir. It was helpful. Thank you po.
Ang ganda ng mic ni Christian. No? May question dito si Janelia. So hopefully I said your name right. For the synchronous sessions, what is the optimum number of meetings? So totoo lang, wala namang talagang number. Pero sige, una sa lahat, I don't know how to contextualize this kasi sa totoo lang, hindi ko alam kung ano yung itsura ng schedule nyo ngayon. Nakaset ba yung synchronous sessions ninyo? Maybe someone from junior high and then senior high can share. Is it set? Is it hard and fixed into the classroom, the schedule of the student? Or do specific teachers have the leeway to schedule when to have synchronous and asynchronous? Sige, anyone from AJHS and ASHS? Para magka-konteksto lang ako. Sorry, hindi ko alam kung sino galing saan. So, I can't call on people. Sige, I'll randomly call on someone. Mark? Junior high ka ba? Senior high?
Junior high po.
Sa junior high, ano yung itsura ng schedule niyo? Para nakaset ba yung synchronous or meron din kayong leeway?
Hindi pa kasi nabibigay sa amin, sir. So, we're not yet too sure entirely po.
Okay, not yet sure, no? Sa senior high ba, parang meron na ba kayong sense? Sorry, hindi ko alam kung sino taga-senior high dito. Anyone? Please unmute yourself. Ma'am, sige. Frances.
Ako yun.
Ma'am,
Free ako.
papatulong naman, free.
For senior high school, anyone would like to share? Sila Vanna.
Hi sir, good afternoon. This is Vanna po. For senior high school po, what we know is that we have, for science, we have 2 hours of 4 hours po pala of session
Okay.
with a certain section, and then that 4 hours is divided to 2 days.
Okay,
Yun po.
okay. Pero whether synchronous or asynchronous siya, para you can still determine that. Or does it always need to begin synchronously?
It has to begin synchronously.
Okay.
And then po, kunyari po sa department namin, sa science po specifically, is that we are given like around 20 to 30 minutes if we want to do it synchronously. And then the rest of the 2 hours po, it's up to us whether we want to do it in consultation or gusto namin na habaan pa yung synchronous na initially we decided.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for sharing, Ivana. I think walang number of meetings, so hindi ko yata masasagot tong tanong na to. But there are different models, so maybe that might help. For example, in some schools that I've seen, what they do is, for example, if they're given 4 hours, they start synchronously, they give an asynchronous task, and then they end synchronously. So the goal of the first synchronous session is usually to clarify instructions, diba? Parang possible misconceptions from the previous session, and then asynchronous yung most of the content delivery and content doing the activities. And then the goal of the synchronous session at the end is to process. So parang ano nangyari, parang saan kayo nahirapan, ano yung malabo, tapos paano natin mapapackage yung pinag-aralan natin this time. No? So para siyang kung familiar kayo dun sa parang prelection, synthesis, di ba? Parang ganun yung structure ng ibang mga sessions na nakita ko. For some, I guess the answer to the number, I think, is maybe I think the question should be changed to what is the task, di ba? I think that's one good guiding principle. Ano ba yung gusto nyong gawin nila? So again, parang if the task is more for them to grapple with a particular concept, maybe asynchronous yun. If the task is to brainstorm, maybe synchronous yun, di ba? If the task is to process misconceptions, maybe mas okay na synchronous yun. If the task is to plan, maybe synchronous yun. Maybe in the first few weeks of class, I would imagine you will do more synchronous first. Not to say that mag-lecture kayo synchronously all the time, but I feel like, to be honest, one of the things that you lose out on sometimes if you just do too much of asynchronous right away is yung getting to know your students. It's different eh. Like for example, I really appreciate, hindi ko pinapatamaan yung iba, but I really appreciate how some of you have kept yourself on camera because it makes me feel less like I'm talking to a wall. So I can see some nodding heads, and then, if we had more conversations, I can begin to match the name with the face, which I think is important eh. And you don't easily see in a discussion forum, diba? Kasi kung may avatar man, parang ganun lang yun, diba? Parang may bilog lang doon. Or minsan wala nga eh, diba? If they don't update their profile pic, you don't even see who's talking, no? It's just a name, diba? So yun. So I guess it's more of identifying what your goals are, what the intention is. And then based on the intention, choosing to do something synchronously or asynchronously. Sige, in true Jessit fashion, sinagot ko yung tanong sa isa pang tanong. Sige, any other questions? Ano ba? Ayan, sorry, may questions pala. Hindi ko lang na-scroll down. How do you personalize formation to students, especially when academics are priority? Yeah, sorry about the... May konting patama dyan. So, sorry about the impression that the ADL modules focus on academics. No, I hope that the webinars on formation has been helpful. We do know that this is something that is a little lacking in the ADL. So, in terms of ADL, para get what you feel is helpful. No, how to personalize formation? I think. My immediate answer to the question about personalizing formation is not to think about whole class formation and to think more formation of individuals and formation of small groups. Siguro yung pwedeng makakatulong na guiding principle. Kasi usually, di ba, pagka nasa formation kayo, the thinking is often, what kinds of activities will I ask the class to do, di ba? But this time kasi, unfortunately, that might not work eh. Kasi parang if you think about it, for example, if you give a recollection, and if someone is giving a talk in the recollection, so it could be an inspiring talk, but then you don't get to really talk to each individual student, no, or talk to students in a small group and really hear them. No? So hopefully, when you think about formation programs, hopefully we redesign what formation looks like given the context. And I think the context is we have to slowly begin to move away from the context that we're used to. And the context that we're used to is always to design for a class, a whole class, diba? But maybe this new context is an invitation to design for smaller groups and to design for specific students, to give more opportunities wherein you really get to talk to one particular student. For example, in a school that I heard about, I forget which school, some of their formation people, the guidance counselors, for example, campus ministry, since they couldn't do a lot of the events that they used to do, they all shifted to phone brigades, calling students, kamusta na? Diba? Parang it takes a long time to finish that, but then for that student who gets a call, it's a big thing, diba? It's a big thing for a student na makamusta, na hindi tungkol sa academics. So maybe the invitation might be that, not to think always in terms of activities, but to think in terms of purpose. But what's the goal? So if the goal is to ask how students are, it might not be an event, diba? If I may share, ayan. Thank you. So may nag-share dito sa chat. Tingnan nyo, maganda yung sharing. They had the maximum 50 minutes, 10 minutes intro and grounding, 20 minutes lecture, 20 minutes mentoring and clarifying. Okay rin yan, no? Yung kailangan nyo lang timplahin, depende dun sa, I think, again, balik tayo sa adaptive, no? Most especially in your first few sessions, subukan nyo timplahin based on your students' access. Kasi makikita nyo naman di ba? Parang on your first synchronous session, how many of your 35 students were able to connect, di ba? That already gives you some sense, di ba? On your second synchronous session, were there students who were not able to connect in the first session, nawala rin sila sa second session. Alarm bells na yun, di ba? So, I think, keep our ear to the ground. Keep our ear to the ground. Diba? Be very much aware of our students. And I think that's the reason why we're really working hard in preparing for our modules before the start of the session. Kasi ang hirap ipagsabay. Believe me, atin-atin lang to, but I'm sort of cramming my modules because I've been busy. And it's so hard to develop the modules and to interact with your students at the same time. Parang I can really find myself splitting my attention, and I'm not very happy about my coach part in the course that I'm running right now. Kasi wala pinupull ako dun sa content part kasi hindi ko pa tapos yung module, kailangan ko pagtuunan ng pansin yun. Ngayon, nauubos yung oras ko doon na hindi ko nababasa yung mga pinopost nila. I don't get to spend as much time as I want really getting a feel of how they're doing in my class, diba? So kaya mahalaga itong ginagawa niyong trabaho ngayon. In as much as mahirap siya, na as much as you can, you're preparing a lot of the materials for your modules. You'll harvest from that when you start teaching. Sige, any other questions? Ayan, dumami nagbukas ng camera. Thank you. Hello, Tanya.
Hello.
Yes.
My question is, kasi nga po, diba, we're putting a lot of effort into making our materials and modules right now. But then what if po, like next year, let's say, like, pwede na go back to school and everything, how can we still use these materials we've used for this year when we go back to school na? Like, is it still applicable? Yun po.
Okay yun. It's a very valid question. I think, to be honest, my prediction is that the most that will happen is that we will transition to a blended learning environment because we will find out that some parts of online learning actually does work. Well, that's my prediction, diba? For you to find out and affirm or negate later on, no? But I think that's a good way of putting it din in light of Tanya's question, that when we shift back to the availability of face-to-face teaching, hopefully, huwag lang tayo mag-switch, di ba? Tingnan din natin kung ano ba yung nag-work. Kasi yung mga nag-work, baka pwede nating iwan. Di ba? Parang, kunyari, let's say, students working at their own pace. Tas parang, for example, one of the things that I realized when I started to teach online is the level of sharing that I get from students in an online discussion. Ang layo from a face-to-face discussion. And I think that's because the online discussion, the online asynchronous discussion as a format allows them the time to think about what they want to say, di ba? And so, medyo mas may lalim ng konti yung nakikita kong sharing doon. So, my prediction is we'll go blended. My prediction is you'll still be able to use whatever you have been creating as materials. And in fact, okay yun eh. That means you don't need to do that in your face-to-face anymore, di ba? Parang saya nun, di ba? Parang, kasi, di ba, we didn't teach just to talk in front of students, di ba? Parang, well, that's for me. Well, I don't know what about you, but hopefully you didn't teach just to step in each classroom and then to talk in front of them. Hopefully you taught to have conversations with the students, di ba? And if we're able to really effectively outsource content delivery, for example, through technology, that creates the space in our face-to-face setting to do something else. And yun ang exciting part, di ba? Since naturo nyo na yung how to do these equations whatsoever outside the classroom, when they enter your classroom, pwede na kayo mag-project together, di ba? Pwede na kayong, it suddenly frees up that 60 minutes that you usually use for content delivery, di ba? So, I guess that's my prediction. So, syempre, hindi ko alam po ano yung magiging decision ng administration moving forward, pero feeling ko wala namang sayang, sa totoo lang. Ayun lang. Thank you, Tanya. So, gawa ka lang ng gawa. Siguro, a note lang dun sa gawa ka ng gawa, no? Again, hindi kailangan bonggang-bonggang YouTube vlogger videos lagi, no? Minsan, kahit text lang, okay lang, diba? Kahit text lang, okay lang. Kahit na, let's say, a short, parang blog type article, okay lang yun. Huwag niyo masyado i-pressure sarili niyo na, na lagi siyang parang mag 1,000 views sa YouTube level na gano'n, diba? Parang, minsan okay lang yung okay lang yung parang susulat kayo ng konti, diba? Kasi kahit naman nagsusulat kayo, parang andun din yung boses ninyo eh, di ba? So when you write, talk to the students, no? Parang don't misconstrue the writing as a medium na formal pag sinusulat. Hindi ibig sabihin ganon. As you saw, di ba, parang I always show pictures of my kid, which I do in a physical classroom, di ba? So, okay lang, para bring your personality there, no? Mahilig kayo sa anime, magpa-anime kayo doon or whatever. Mahalaga rin yun eh, para makilala kayo ng students. Di ba? Parang ano rin siya, parang it makes the relationship more predictable too. Di ba? Parang kunyari, meron kang nagiging bagong kaibigan, nas nakikilala mo siya, it becomes more predictable. Ganun din eh. Parang we're building relationships with our students too, albeit online. No? Ano pa guys? Okay. Sige, hopefully the silence means napaisip ko kayo at the very least. But hopefully, hopefully the ADL did not cause more anxiety or pressure. Again, the ADL for us, as we share about it, is really a guide. Diba? A guide that will hopefully help you make decisions. No? Kasi, as you move forward, well, teaching in general, diba, is about making decisions. It will make thousands of decisions, diba? This time, iba lang yung decisions. It's not just how you react to students or what will you say to this student na nangungulangot sa harapan mo, diba? Hindi lang ganong klaseng decision, no? But a lot of instructional decisions, most especially. Yeah, interesting tong parang nasa chat na parang connecting them to community engagement. Hindi ko pa alam kung paano mangyari yun, no? Virtual immersion, but talagang we really have to be creative. Sample lecture. Sige, pwede. Sige, I can show you one. Gusto nyo? Quick lang. Sige. Let me open my course. Sige, hindi lang. So yung lecture ko medyo mahaba siya. Yes, may caveat agad. Pero hindi siya mahaba dahil marami akong sinasabi kasi gusto kong parang yung lecture, parang kinakausap pa rin yung students. So marami akong mga pause, usually. Let me try to, sorry, I haven't tried to your entire screen. Hindi ko sure kung maririnig niyo yung video, pero subukan natin. So here's a lecture that I made. Sige, for example. Kita nyo ba yung video? Sorry nagugulan ako sa meet na sa ilalim kayo. Kita nyo? Yes? Do you see the video? Okay. I'll just play a bit. Just let me know if you hear the sound. Narinig nyo yung sound? Wala. Wait lang. It needs to be on YouTube. Sandali lang. Sige, so hindi ko to pinapakita as a best example. No? Sa totoo lang, pag pinapakinggan ko yung sarili ko, nabobore ako minsan. Pero para lang makita niya kung gaano lang kasimple yung pwedeng maging input video na hindi kailangan laging Sige, so ginawa ko to sa keynote. Sana mag-play. Teka lang. Let me play a bit and then I just want to check if you will hear the sound. Nadinig niyo yung sound kanina? Hindi. Wait lang. Let me check sandali. Yung problema sa Google Meet Sandali. Stop presenting. Present now. Chrome tab. Okay.
No? Activities and platforms that we have access to now. In this particular section, we will begin to think about the different possible gaps, different possible challenges that learners might encounter that might affect the level of participation that you might be able to expect from them when you prepare your online course. We'll begin a reflection with an image. This image actually circulated online over the past few years.
Okay, narinig niyo ba yun? Yung sample? Okay. So, hindi ko na ipa-play, no? Kasi baka ma-bore kayo. Kasi syempre hindi nakasituate yung video. Yes, defensive. Pero, kita niyo naman, simple lang, di ba? Parang, hindi ko sinasabi yun yung best at yun yung most engaging. At just to put some context, grad school to. No? So, parang, siguro naman, medyo mas mataas yung assumption ko dun sa propensity nila na tiisin yung aking lecture. But nevertheless, I keep it short. And then, I don't know if you notice the language. No? I try to make it conversational. And then, when I show a slide, I often don't talk over a slide. I try to use the slide intentionally. So for example, if you heard that bit a while ago, I referred to the image on the slide, diba? So, ganun din sana, no? So, most especially when you're using visuals, wag lang sana palamuti, na parang, diba? Parang nagsalta kayo, biglang may dadaan na spaceship dyan, parang cute, diba? Pero, parang sana, parang intentional siya, diba? Na parang, pag may dumaan na spaceship, sabihin nyo, oh, dumaan yung spaceship. Ano ibig sabihin yan, diba? So, kumbaga, make it a conversation with your students. Parang remind yourself na pag may pinakita kayo, nakikita nila yan. Okay, so dahil nakikita nila yan, bakit nila nakikita yan? Bakit mahalaga nakikita nila yan? Anong gusto mong tingnan nila? Di ba? So, parang subukan nating iwasan yan. No? Let's try to veer away from the possibility that the visuals that we use are really just to quote-unquote engage them visually, na parang maganda lang siya, di ba? But gamitin talaga natin sila for learning. No? So, for me, my guiding principle is always be intentional. So, if you put a word there, ba't nandyan yung word, di ba? Ano gusto mong sabihin tungkol sa word na yan? Diba? Parang, if you put a picture there, di ba? Andyan si Snoopy, ba't nandyan si Snoopy? Kung walang relationship si Snoopy sa pinag-uusapan mo, tanggalin mo si Snoopy, di ba? So, yun lang. Kasi syempre, we get carried away, di ba? Parang ito na yung chance ko na maging YouTuber. So, huwag tayo maging carried away. Dahil it's not about you. No? It's about your students. No? So always think about what their experience will be. Di ba? Parang imagine nyo lagi yung reaction videos nila. Di ba? Kapag pinapanood yung mga videos na ginagawa nyo. Siguro that's one way of putting it. Di ba? Kung may reaction video yung student nyo, habang pinapanood yung video nyo, ano yung reaction na yon, di ba? Parang, atok na ako, alis na ako. Or parang, Hindi ko na-gets yun. So, be very conscious of what you want, how you want them to react as an audience. Kasi yun parang that shifts what you will invest time in. But you will invest less time in looking for the most high-res picture of the whatever, and you will spend more time choosing an image that's appropriate enough, and then using it so that students will understand what you want them to understand. Diba? Yung isang tip siguro yung mahirap transcription, sa totoo lang, confession yun. Ang strategy na naisip ko na nakatulong sa akin is I upload my lecture videos to YouTube. Well, this works if you're speaking in English, and then YouTube can actually auto-transcribe for you, and you can copy-paste from YouTube. So that's a helpful tip if you're worrying about transcription. Another tip is if you do lecture notes, just give the lecture notes, diba? Don't transcribe anymore. Anyway, the lecture notes will be very much the same as what you're talking about. Kasi when you transcribe, you'll notice that it's also different. For example, when I transcribed that video, I said things like, as what you can see on screen. So kung wala kayo nakikita on screen and you see my words saying that, walang sense sa inyo yun, diba? So you have to, usually the transcription might not literally be a direct transcription of what you're saying. So yun. So again, may mga tips yun. So YouTube, lecture notes. If you feel your lecture notes are enough, bigay nyo na lang yun. Hindi naman kailangan 1:1 lagi ang transcription. Kasi yung point is accessibility. The point is whatever students can learn from the video content, they can learn from the alternative medium. But again, check on your students, no? Kasi pwedeng hindi naman kailangan, diba? So find out. But hopefully, because of Kudo Personalis, even if only one student says na kailangan nila, gawin pa rin natin, diba? Para dun sa one student na yon. Yes. Totoo yun. Mahalaga yun. Kasi kailangan maramdaman ng bawat student na mahalaga sila. Kasi parang in online learning, it feels lonely diba? Kasi diba, you're not around people So you want it to feel less lonely for each student. And I think that's a good, that's something that's always driven me when I design. Could you send us a sample? Huwag na yung send kasi nakakahiya pero nakita niyo naman kanina. Okay. Anything else? Kaya niyo yan. Feeling niyo lang hindi, pero kaya niyo yan. No? Uh, at the end of the day, it's really communication. For me, yun yung pinakamahalaga. Diba? Kahit na, kunyari, hindi nyo na natapos lahat ng module nyo, game na. Diba? Bigay nyo sa students nyo, but communicate with them. Alamin nyo kung ano yung nag-work, ano yung hindi. Diba? For example, estimated learning time. Mahirap yun, ha? Parang how will you actually predict how long it will take for them to do it, diba? And you'll need to calibrate that in the first few weeks of class. For example, if you intend for this activity to be 30 minutes, tanong nyo sila, diba? How long did it actually take you? And reassure them na hindi maapektuhan yung grade nila, hindi to evaluation. It's really you finding out. So in the first few weeks, I think expect yourself to calibrate. And I think that's important eh. Parang set that expectation. Magka-calibrate pa tayo. Parang ito yung mga assumptions ko ngayon. Ang assumption ko, kaya nilang basahin to in 30 minutes. But in actuality, how long did it actually take for them to read it? Diba? Parang, and then use those new assumptions. Use that new context when you move forward. Mahalaga yun eh, na dapat iterative yung process natin. Para yun. Kasi gawa lang tayo nagawa, tapos hindi naman pala nag-work, hindi naman pala nila kinakaya, diba? So parang useless, diba? So you have to find a way to meet them where they are. Ayan. Work from home. Sige, anything else? Yeah, I don't know how does it mean. You don't need to know how to edit. Sorry. You don't need Adobe Premiere. Yung pinakita ko sa inyo kanina, ano lang yon, keynote lang yon. Actually, pwede nyo rin gawin sa PowerPoint yon. Kasi ang maganda sa PowerPoint tsaka sa keynote ngayon, meron silang save as video na wala dati. So literally, ang ginawa ko lang doon, nag-shoot lang ako ng intro video para nakikita naman nila ako. Pinasok ko sa slide. And then the rest of the slides, voice lang. And then I just save it as a video. Diba? Syempre, it's not as sexy as a YouTube video that you would often see, but I think it works. So far, mukha naman, okay lang, di ba? Hindi pa naman nila sinasanto yung mga modules namin. Okay.
Anyone else? Last one? Wala na? Okay, so we call it a day. Mr. Galvin, maraming salamat sa oras at expertise na ibinahagi niyo sa amin ngayong araw. Personally, I also learned a lot, no? Kasi since we'll be doing online setup, I think I can also apply some of the concepts, especially in guiding my kids, no, with their online classes. And of course, most importantly, yun lang naman, equipping our new teachers, no, especially with this new setup for this school year. And thank you also to the junior high school newbies and senior high school aunts for your active participation, especially in sharing and raising your questions to our resource person for today. So maraming salamat sa inyong lahat.